Hey, what is going on, guys? So today I want to talk about Destiny's controversial views on veganism, which he expressed on the Dropping In podcast, which comes from that very popular YouTube channel everybody knows, Charisma on Command. I've already expressed in a much shorter video my confusion over the conflict between Destiny's purported views on animals and his actions. So just in case you haven't seen it, here it is.
Yeah, no, that's a good line of reasoning. What would your response be?
I don't care about dogs or cats at all.
Oh, he does. Oh my gosh, he does want belly rubs. Oh, yes.
I don't care about dogs or cats at all. I don't care about dogs or cats at all.
If you really see an animal right in front of you, like a cow or a dog or a cat or whatever, you can say, I don't mind the thought of it being stabbed, but just imagine someone just doing just horrible things to it. Just like grabbing the knife and like just gouging its eye out or something, or like pulling its teeth out one by one. That wouldn't trigger a kind of like emotional response in you, even if not an intuitive emotional response. Don't you at least not want that to happen because you can understand logically that being doesn't want that to happen, and if you were them you wouldn't want it to happen?
No, but for weird reasons, because I just don't see the difference between that thing versus any like inanimate object or whatever. I guess I don't draw a distinction there.
Why did he do that? I don't want to hurt him. I don't want to hurt him. I don't want to hurt him. I don't want to hurt him.
Are you saying, just to be clear, that you don't have any reaction at all to an animal being killed?
No, I don't think so.
Why did he do that? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Why did he do that? Oh, I'm sorry.
I just don't see the difference between that thing versus any like inanimate object or whatever. I guess I don't draw a distinction there.
So yeah, unless Destiny's views have changed in between those couple clips, I'm not sure what to make of what we just watched. Anyway, let's get on to the podcast and Destiny's controversial views.
What is your, have you thought morally about meat eating, and is it informed, or is it just what you like the taste of?
Basically, vegans start from a point of we ought to value sentient life. I typically start from the point of we ought to value human sentient life. People will ask me, why humans versus all sentient life? And I'll say, well, I think the human conscious experience is something unique that we ought to protect, but it's kind of arbitrary because it's very foundational. And they'll say, well, I think we should protect all life. And I'll say, well, why? And they'll go, well, because suffering is bad. And it's like, why is it, but the suffering of what things is bad? It's like, well, why? And you start to ground out in these areas that are like fundamentally unknowable or outside of like human knowledge. Yeah, so that's why I'm a meter. The ethical arguments get like very, very into the weeds on like, epistemics and ethics in terms of like how do we figure out exactly where our foundational belief is here for all of our ethical beliefs. But where I'm at is I'm a meat eater.
So I'm not going to spend any time in this video getting into epistemics or anything like that. I just want to see if Destiny's moral system actually approves of the consumption of not just non-human animals, but particular humans. So far, I've heard that Destiny thinks that we ought value human sentient life and not sentient life generally. Although I've watched this video already and know Destiny is going to later elaborate on what he thinks humans can experience which animals cannot, I still want to start with saying that with the limited information we have at this moment, if Destiny thinks that we simply ought value human sentient life as opposed to sentient life in general, does this mean that if we found out tomorrow that Destiny wasn't actually human and therefore didn't possess human sentience, that it would be ethical to turn him into a hamburger? I certainly hope not. And here is another interpretation. Destiny says that when he is asked for a justification for this differential view on human sentience and sentience generally, he says that he thinks the human experience is unique. To me, this indicates that it isn't necessarily being human that makes a human have value in Destiny's view, but instead the, quote, unique experience which humans tend to have. What follows from this is that if we found a human being who did not possess this, quote, unique human experience, that it would be ethical to kill them for a hamburger. Now, of course, we would need to know what Destiny means when he says the, quote, unique human experience before trying to conceptualize what a human would look like who doesn't possess this unique human experience. So let's continue, because from what I remember, Destiny's views on this get a little more nuanced as the video goes on, and we gain a better understanding as to what he means when he says a unique human experience.
But I'm a consistent meat eater, okay? I think that most people on this planet, based on where their ethical intuitions lie, should probably be vegetarians, I think. The usually what I get the most fun out of is anytime like an animal gets like tortured or killed, like Cecil the lion or that the gorilla that got shot when the kid. Yeah. Whenever shit like this happens, I will relentlessly make fun of meat eaters that get super emotionally invested and involved and get like cry or whatever when like between like snarfing down, mouthfuls of chicken nuggets and cheeseburgers of animals that are being factory farmed and stuff. I think it's incredibly hypocritical. If you care about stuff like your dog or your cat and all this, probably you shouldn't be like a meat eater. If it like morally bothers you if people eat like cats or dogs, but you think it's okay to eat cows or pigs or whatever. But yeah, that's a whole other.
I at least enjoy this part where Destiny admits that most people should be vegan. He says vegetarian, but I'm pretty sure he just means vegan.
Got it. So you mentioned that your ground is human sentience. Is that a reasoned position, or is that just an intuitive moral position where you don't feel a connection to animals?
I think at some point we're gonna have to say that it's intuitive, but I mean, like the rationale, I guess, is that like I feel like human conscious experiences. There's a lot of parts of these that are incredibly unique that only exist insofar as like human experiences go. So like comprehension of language, not just like speaking a word and having a reaction, but like the entire there's an entire cognition that goes into understanding language that like only humans understand. So for instance, like animals can't understand negatives, for instance. Like if I tell you, your mom is not in that room, that has like semantic meaning to you. You understand that. But an animal can't understand a negative, or they can't understand like being able to describe something else in another time or place. They have like more like complicated systems of like Pavlovian responses, essentially, right? Like if I bark, I could tell you there's like danger or food, but I couldn't communicate like complicated information that exists in different time or space and things. Like there's a lot of like parts of our mind, of our conscious sentient experiences that are incredibly elevated compared to animals. So I'll say that like that's probably the reason why I value the human conscious experience a bit differently. But I mean, at the end of the day, that's going to, like I said, well, why would you value that? There's a very common line of vegan argumentation called name the trait, where they'll try to get you to say like, well, what is the one trait a human has that every human has that animals don't have? Yeah. Basically stuff like that. And it gets pretty difficult to go through the weeds, but that's essentially kind of where I wind up.
All right. So Destiny began to elaborate on his concept of human sentience. This human sentience entails comprehension of language, but not just speaking a word and having a reaction, but something more complex like understanding negatives. Secondly, it entails a person being able to describe something else in another time or place. So assuming these are the things that Destiny thinks are required for somebody to have the quote unique human experience, if we found a severely mentally handicapped human who can still experience pain and well-being, but was incapable of understanding negatives and describing something in another time or place, Destiny would have to consider it ethical to murder them for a hamburger. That's definitely not insane or anything. And here's something else I find interesting. Regardless of whether or not they were human, he would also have to give rights to a hypothetical animal or even alien species who possess the ability to understand negatives and describe something else in another time or place. And if we could find that, we couldn't really call this the quote unique human experience. But anyway, let's continue.
Got it. And I mean, because that was where I was going to ask, was just like someone who, it has a language deficiency or is mentally retarded, which I don't know what we call that nowadays. Like
not that word.
Is not that, is maybe that's why people are upset when you use it, because you would eat them. Is how do you answer that, name that trait objection?
Yeah, I never go by traits. I say that like humans are gifted a priori with like the faculty for a type of cognition that doesn't exist even in like apes or gorillas.
All right, so I am a little bit confused here. The host actually asks him about a human who was mentally handicapped and didn't have these abilities, to which Destiny says he never goes by traits when trying to justify his differential attitudes with humans and non-humans, and then confusingly goes on to name a trait. That trait specifically being, quote, being gifted a priori with the faculty for a type of cognition that doesn't exist in non-human animals. So Destiny says he doesn't go by a trait when he does. He just named a trait. And secondly, there are humans who don't appear to have this level of cognition. Take the obvious example of certain mentally handicapped humans. So there is even evidence conflicting with the idea that humans are inherently gifted a priori with this type of cognition. These examples call into question Destiny's belief that humans are gifted a priori with this kind of cognition. So the question remains, if we come across a human who we have no greater reason to believe has been gifted with these cognitive abilities, which constitute the, quote, unique human experience that Destiny describes, to any greater degree than a cow, pig, or chicken, does Destiny think that it would be ethical to breed, exploit, and murder these kinds of humans for a hamburger? I certainly hope not. I think it's clear that Destiny does not value human sentience per se, mainly because there are human beings who lack the ability to communicate and understand in the way that he described earlier, which constitutes the unique human experience, in his view, of course. He probably needs to rename what he calls the unique human experience to something else like sentience, which entails the ability to understand negatives and describe something else in another time or place. He also needs to accept the fact that in his view, it is ethical to kill a segment of the human population for a hamburger. More specifically, about 5% of humans with intellectual disabilities, or 0.1% of the human population. This is about 7.9 million humans. These numbers were grabbed from a thread Dr. Avi did months ago on the amount of humans who lack the traits Destiny thinks are required for one to have what he calls the quote, unique human experience, which affords them the right to not be killed for a hamburger in the way that animals are. I'll have that thread linked below. Oh, and just one final point I wanted to make just about the absurdity, at least in my view, and I think most people's view, that is what Destiny requires in a being for them to be even considerate of not being put in a factory farm or being tortured or killed. Imagine, and I'm just saying this off the cuff, there was an animal who was being tortured and someone was like, hey, let's stop doing that. That's not good. That's immoral, like as any person would, right? Any normal person. And then Destiny's there like, oh, but dude, they can't understand negatives and they don't have an ability to communicate about something else in some other place. Just imagine the insanity of that. Like animals just being tortured perpetually. And everyone's like, hey, maybe we should stop this. And Destiny's like, well, dude, I don't know, bro. Understanding negatives and being able to communicate about other things in other locations and times, they can't do that. So fuck it, let's just keep torturing them, like whatever, who cares? Pretty insane. All right, guys, that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you support my work and want to get early access to it, you can click the link in the pinned comment and support me on Patreon. And if you don't know, I do have a book going over most, if not all, of the anti-vegan arguments you're going to hear online. If you want to get that as well, that'll be linked in the pinned comment. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Dude,
Fuck off. I don't want anything to do with you. Don't ever speak to me again. You're a fucking piece of shit.
even vegans don't get your weird, stupid wannabe sense of irony here. Who is your audience? Nobody gets these dumb jokes. Dude,